ask me, I would say like you must have overarching central question. Please, some of the words I'd like to share with everyone who are attending this webinar. When you would want to write, use the word, begin your research question with how, or and or why. It, like I said just now, how and or why, it requires or it needs further explanation that you can't just use survey questionnaire to help you with it to find the answer. They need how do you do this and why you do this. If you ask people, they give you explanation from it. So you can't ask them and you have that preconceived or predetermined answers for them. Well, that's the thing. That's the first thing. And I like to share with words in qualitative research, trying use some of the words like describe, you would want to explore, understand, experience, you process, how and in what way, and like one of my projects just now, gain a deeper understanding. These are some of the keywords that you would want to use when you would want to develop your research question. Again, there's always an overarching research question, or we call it central question, the biggest question, but followed from there is your sub-question. Sub-question, you need to break down. So each and every question, if you can get the answer from the data collection, which respond to each and every of your research sub-question, at the end, your central question will be answered and achieved. That's how it works.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Hairi. A very clear answer. Actually, we have still a lot of question, but we doesn't have time. Yeah? So we move into next session. Yeah? We will continue the second part of the webinar, which will focus on the topic of the application of focus group in qualitative research. I would like to invite Assistant Professor Dr. Joel Reynolds, our invited speakers from School of Hospitality Leadership, DePaul University, Chicago, and Associate Professor Dr. Anirudh Naig from Department of Apparel, Hospitality and Event Management, Iowa State University, to deliver their talk on the application of focus group in qualitative research.
All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for this opportunity, UITM, and welcome to all the attendees. I am Dr. Joel Reynolds. I'll go first, and then Dr. Naig will follow me. We're going to be talking about obviously qualitative approaches, but specifically focus group approaches. So good morning, I should also say, from Chicago here in the United States. But today I will talk predominantly about hotel leadership competencies, and again, taking that qualitative approach. My presentation will provide a brief introduction and literature review to kind of give you an understanding of what one of my specific research projects was about. But really what I would like this presentation to be about is designing a focus group research project, as well as its data collection, data analysis, and then some best practices that I have kind of developed or understood. And I appreciate the previous speaker who eloquently answered quite a few of the questions that I would have asked, but really set up my presentation quite well. So very briefly, when we look at hotel leadership competencies, there's a lot that has changed in the last few years. Certainly the emergence of technology, globalization, changing customer demands, I should add, obviously a global pandemic into there. But what I sought to understand were, what are the competencies that the leaders of the future need in hotels? What type of skill set is going to be important to run a hotel organization? And competency models can assist organizations by identifying these skills and knowledge, and then help to develop that within that particular organization.
Excuse me, Dr. Joel, you need to stop the presentation and then restart back because your screen is actually completely blank.
Oh. Okay.
Okay.
I'm sorry about that. Well, let's restart here.
Your screen is actually still blank. Or you
How about-
accidentally, I can see your slide, but I cannot see you presenting. Yeah, take your time, doctor.
Okay. So you could see my screen, just not me?
I guess maybe your camera is off.
Okay.
Can you try on and off your camera again?
How about now?
No, still blank.
Better now?
Oh, still blank. We only can
Oh.
see JR. Oh, maybe you can remove the background. Maybe the background actually caused a problem with the camera.
How about now? A secondary camera.
Oh, secondary camera. Still blank actually.
Would it be better for Dr. Naig to go first then while I fix this, or should I proceed without the camera on?
I can go if Joel needs some time. I wonder
Yeah.
I wonder if Dr. Reynolds needs to like log out of the whole session and then come back, maybe.
Yeah, I think so.
Maybe. Okay. Okay, so let me share. Okay, he stopped sharing. Okay. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so are you able to see my screen? Up. Hang on. Are you able to see my screen or no? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. Just to be sure here. Okay. Let me start my timer because if not, if I keep talking, I'll just keep talking. So let's see. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to, to talk with all of you. I think it's very amazing that, given the time difference between here and Malaysia, you are, attending a webinar later in the evening, So I don't know how thrilled I would be if I had to attend a webinar so late. But that is amazing that you are doing that. So like we your moderator has said, what we are going to do is we are going to talk about application of the methods, that is about quantitative method, because I mean it's good to know theoretical, but like for me I find it better. I feel like I understand better when I have an example. So but that could be just my way of learning, because if there's a lot of theory, which is good, but also an example does help. So that's what I am presenting here. So this presentation is based on a publication that we did a while ago. As you can see, it's 2013, but the concepts are still very relevant. And then this is a project that was led by Dr. Susan Arendt, who's also at Iowa State, and I think quite a few of you know her already. So I was part of the team that was involved in this study. It was my first time really experiencing qualitative methods. And I should be honest that at the beginning I was so confused because I wasn't sure what exactly was going on, because I was so used to just doing surveys and things like that. And when I was a graduate student, I did take a class in qualitative methods, and I found that to be really confusing because it seemed like there was a lot of things that were up for interpretation. It's like, oh, maybe, maybe not, and with survey, even with survey, there's like, obviously there's like interpretation, but it seems like with quantitative, there seems to be like a really kind of black and white, though actually it's not. But with qualitative, it seemed like it was like all over the place. And so it was kind of stressful from the beginning, but then afterwards, as things came together, they kind of made sense. So what happened was that in 2012, around that, like 2011, 2012, we got like Dr. Aaron got a contact from the Iowa Department of Inspections and Appeals. So that is the department that does, that's the state department that does food safety inspections, and then they do many other things. But basically they do food like foodborne illness tracing and all those things associated with foodborne illness, which is also food poisoning. And they really wanted to know, like, why is it that people, do people know that if they have food poisoning, that they can, that they can contact, and there could be something that could be done. But so that's what they wanted to know, like, okay, how could they reach to people and they can let people know that you can, there is a mechanism in place for reporting foodborne illness. And also, so there are things that can be done because people don't usually think about food poisoning as really a problem until they get really sick or end up in the hospital. So so the whole team went to Des Moines to the office, and we had a discussion about, okay, what is it that you really want from us? So you want us to what is the purpose of this study? Because without knowing the purpose, it's kind of it's kind of vague on what needs to be done. And then after we learned from them, okay, this is what they are wanting to know. Then then we put a contract together, and then so this project was funded. So they gave us $30,000 in funding for this project, and that funding was used to conduct the study, to do the to pay the participants, and also the graduate student who was involved in the data analysis and data collection, and any other expenses that may have been there with that. So I will not spend much time on this because the previous speaker has already talked about this. But so first, talking about focus group, my question was also when we started this, like, oh, what is a focus group? Is it like a huge interview or is it like an unstructured interview? I kind of felt like I wasn't, it was kind of like, seemed like it's kind of like an unstructured interview, but it's not really an unstructured interview. So so it's very important for us to, when we talk about a method, to know what that method is about. So because if we know the method, then we know, okay, what does it really mean? And is it really applicable to the goals or the research questions that you are asking? And then, like mentioned earlier, so with the focus groups, of course, there's going to be a questionnaire, but it's going to have questions that are open-ended. They are not going to be like, okay, tell me, do you like winter? And I'm just using a random question. Yes, no, because there isn't like, you cannot really say, or maybe you could say yes, no, and maybe, but it doesn't really get into the crux of the matter. So you want to ask like, what are your thoughts about winter? That would be probably a better question than do you like winter? So so usually, so that's what we have in terms of focus groups. So having people and then having them talk, asking them broad-ended questions and then, just letting them talk. So that's what you would do. So then it's important to remember that in a focus group, it is not a debate. You're not collecting people so that we can argue about something, or you're trying to do therapy, or try to solve some problem, or thinking about like a collaboration, or trying to promote your program or promote yourself. And it's not an educational session because so that is not what a focus group is. So in this project, in which we looked at, why do people not report foodborne illness? And this was done looking at the point of view from consumers, but also from the point of view of healthcare providers, so nurses and doctors, is why is it that they don't report foodborne illness? So, and these are just some statistics from the Centers of Disease Control in the US. Is about how many people get sick from foodborne illness, and this is also just an estimate. But the thought is that probably there are more people who do get a foodborne illness or like food poisoning, but they don't but they don't think about it because they just think, oh, I just have diarrhea, or oh, I feel nauseous, and then after a day they are fine, or at the end of the day they are fine or whatever. So people don't really think about food poisoning. And you think about yourself, like how often do you think about food poisoning? So then so what's happening is that there is a concern in about food safety, and then also, even though there are a lot of resources that are available, most of the patients, and you can also think about yourself, you tend to trust your doctor more, assuming your doctor is good. So then you think like your doctor is going to tell you what is the right information, what is the right diagnosis. So people trust doctors, but doctors, maybe they themselves aren't really very sure about how to go about with foodborne illness. And also research has shown that healthcare providers are not really very sure about about the foodborne illness. Like, okay, oh, I don't know, I'm not sure. Is it salmonella? Well, yes, maybe no, So the purpose of this study was to identify barriers for underreporting by consumers and also healthcare workers, and also identify like solutions to overcome those barriers. So what was done is that in the recruitment phase, so there were 35 consumers that were, we recruited them, and then also there were healthcare professionals. So here I would like to mention that it was very difficult to get healthcare professionals to participate, because I think as they just had a very busy schedule, and it was just very hard to get them schedule. With consumers, it wasn't a huge problem because being here in this in this town, which is more like a college town, there were more people who were kind of available, and the incentive to participate was very good. I think we paid them around like $75, because they spent like a long time with us. But getting healthcare workers to participate was kind of challenge. And then we use flyers, and and they were posted in grocery stores and also through other places where we could reach out to more people. So when doing the focus group, so we had Dr. Arndt, and we had another person, Janelle Meyer, and so Dr. Arndt was the main moderator because she's the qualitative researcher, and then Janelle Meyer was the assistant moderator, and me and other people involved were note takers, so that maybe somebody else was saying something, and maybe Janelle missed it or Dr. Arndt missed it, then so we can all then compare our notes. And then we also use pseudonyms because you don't want to put the actual names of people, because that's a problem with IRB, so Institutional Review Board, because that is also because it compromises the participant confidentiality. So using a pseudonym, or like, okay, if your name is Anne, but you will be called, I don't know, Rachel, so something like that. And then also there were snacks that were provided, and there was a lot of money and snacks. It was kind of a very good deal, actually, so for people to come and participate. And then, of course, they were recorded and then they were transcribed. So some of the questions for consumers is like, have you ever had food poisoning? And also over here, what we did is like, we did not ask them, have you suffered from food-borne illness? Because that's not what is commonly used term. The most commonly used term is food poisoning. So that's why we changed that term. So over here, the point to note is that using language that your audience understands, and not just using technical terms, because they'll get like confused. And then, okay, how was your experience when the illness happened, and what did you do about it? Did you report it? Because we want to know about that. And then also, as part of foodborne illness condition, one of the common ways in which you can diagnose it is by collecting a stool sample. So how many of them were actually comfortable collecting a stool sample, we were wondering if that is a problem, or maybe people don't even know about that, So, and for healthcare providers, we asked them about like what is their level of concern, like the level of concern from patients and clients about safety of our food. I'm just checking my time. Okay, and what do they think about where patients can get foodborne illness, and what are the barriers that healthcare providers face for diagnosing foodborne illness, and what are their experiences, and how do they reason and suspect that, okay, this is actually foodborne illness. So for the consumers, like over here is just a brief demographics of who we have. So as you can see, a lot of participants were female, and then also with the age rate, we had like a good representation across the different ages, and that's important because if we had just only young people, so maybe it's possible that they may or may not have gotten really sick from a foodborne illness, and because their immune system is going to be stronger. So it was good to have a wide variety. And then with education, as you can see, even though there were 35 participants, so we have some who had high school, some who had college. So it's just kind of a variety of people. And then also people who were of different socioeconomic status. And it's no surprise that because it's in Iowa, like it's in the Midwest. So the majority of the participants were Caucasian. And then we also ask them questions about like, okay, do you have healthcare? Because asking people about why do you not report food poisoning? But if they do not have insurance, because in the US you need to have insurance in order to be treated, or maybe in some cases. I mean, there are some public things also, but usually you need something. So if we are going to ask people about why do you not go to the doctor, but if they don't have health care, then there's no point asking that question. And then we also asked a question about food allergies because we wanted to be clear that people understand that food allergy is not necessarily food poisoning, because with food poisoning we are talking about microbial contamination or chemical or physical contamination. Well, food allergy is a condition you get from eating a food that your body doesn't agree with, but it's different. And then how concerned are they about food safety? So if you see over here, this is a lot of information, but you can see that when asked the questions about, okay, what is your concern about food that is say served away from home, and what do you think is the best approach for reducing the risk of foodborne illness? So some people think it's more more inspections, and then some people say better quality control. I wonder what they're talking about quality control. Are they confusing quality of food with the safety of food, or do they mean safety in terms of quality? So kind of like it seemed like something kind of seemed unclear. And then if people had been sick, and if you can see like the question, did you seek medical treatment? You see that many of them really did not get any medical treatment. And if they did, then very few of them went to the emergency room, because usually we don't think like that. And usually we just think, oh, my stomach is upset, let me drink some Pepto-Bismol, and then that will be fine. And then when you went to the medical provider, what happened? So it's like very few people went, and if something happened, if they did, then maybe they took a blood sample or a stool sample. And then again, more questions about like, okay, did you get sick when you were, from eating something? Or, as an adult, have you ever provided a stool sample? So that was like 50-50 kind of. Some people had, some people had not. And then also, did the medical provider confirm diagnosis with a stool sample? And they said, no, they did not, for most cases. So based on the consumer, the focus group, so these are just some of the items that the ideas that the participants had. So when I asked them, if you get if you think you have food poisoning, who should you report to? So you can see over here it says the poison center, because there's a poison center hotline that you can call if you have like exposed to like some kind of poisoning. And some person said no, nurse, and some people said, oh, I'm going to call the federal FDA, Food and Drug Administration. And there's some said, oh, well, maybe I'll call the restaurant. So it seemed like people had like a wide variety of like ideas of who they should be contacting. And it was not like similar. And then, so then when asked about how did you know that you have food poisoning, so they said, oh, maybe depending on how severe my situation was, and how long I've had it. And did you report it? Mostly people just said no because I was too sick to go to the doctor, and I wasn't sure. And then maybe they became all right very soon, so they didn't bother. So when asked about stool samples, they said like like how some illustrative quotes about stool samples. So most of the time, based on the discussion over there, it seemed like they were not really sure. Like, oh, I don't know, I feel uncomfortable giving a stool sample, or or I'm so sick that I cannot even go to the bathroom to like collect a sample. And also when somebody is having diarrhea and things like that, they are so tired already, and kind of like confused because you're dehydrated. So then, but it seemed like some people were like, okay, I'll give a stool sample, but some others were like, oh, I don't know, kind of like some kind of hesitancy to collect a stool sample, and also worrying about like how do I transport it to the doctor's office and things like that. So when we asked healthcare providers, like what are some barriers to diagnosing food poisoning? So they said, well, because the time between eating a food and the treatment is usually like the problem, because people come to the doctor's office only if they become like super sick. So then, it's kind of like, okay, what did you eat 2 days ago? What did you eat 3 days ago? Or whatever, so people can't remember. And usually the food that is eaten, either you eat all of it or you throw some of it, the remaining away. So you don't have a sample that you can go back and check, because you can check the stool sample, but you would need to check the food to see if it was contaminated. And patients also are not sure. They never think like, oh, I have food poisoning. And then also healthcare providers may not have the knowledge about food poisoning. So when asked about healthcare providers, okay, how would you like to receive information about food poisoning? And they said by email, newsletters, mostly it's emails that people really want. Webinars, webinars are getting kind of old because, it's kind of difficult to sit in a webinar for too long. And then when asked about the experiences of working with suspected food poisoning, they say that sometimes they knew that to suspect about food poisoning, depending on severity and experiences with foodborne illness. And when more people get sick, so more people present the same one, so it's a foodborne illness outbreak. And then afterwards, if there's a suspicion, then they do further testing and other diagnostic tests that they do. So what were some issues with identifying, like diagnosing food poisoning? So they said the cost, and then the test, and the patient is not also knowledgeable. The healthcare professional also doesn't know, and then, like I said, unavailability of the suspected food, and also the time that has passed. And reasons that stool samples are not taken is because of the cost, the lack of healthcare professional knowledge about the foodborne illness, and then just the challenge to collect and transport and everything like that. All the symptoms were too mild. And then again with diagnosis, the reasons were similar. So some of the other barriers, so based on all this that happened, based on consumers and healthcare professionals, so what we came to know is that for consumers, we need to provide them resources about stool sample collection, and also telling them about why is it important, and what is the process, and about the stool sample collection, and then giving it to the doctor's office. And for healthcare professionals, like kind of teaching them about the importance of collecting a stool sample when they suspect a foodborne illness, and also maybe giving them like a flow chart, like which says, okay, if you have this and this, then yes, no, and then going down with a flow chart that might help them determine, like, okay, is this food poisoning or not? And then also having a way in which food poisoning can be reported easily, because if something is hard to do, if it involves a lot of steps, we are not going to do that, especially when you're sick and you have to go do this and this and this. So that's too much. It needs to be easier to report any kind of problems that are there. So based on all of that, so what came out of all this project? So based on that, we realized that, okay, we need an easy way for people to report about foodborne illness. So then the DIA, the Department of Inspections and Appeals, then came up with this poster in which it says, okay, if you think you have food poisoning, then call this number 844 iOS 6. So it's easier to remember, and so then it's just so based on all this work that was done, we now have a practical outcome, and now this is now used by the state of Iowa, and it is advertised sometime on TV also, and people can know about it. That okay, this is who I can call if I feel I'm sick. So what are some lessons that I learned from this? Because it was my first experience actually participating in a qualitative research. So I realized that it needs a lot of planning. And then also it's very helpful when some members of the team has experience with qualitative research, because I was completely blind. So I really needed more help. Recruitment was a challenge, but we are able to get consumers, but not necessarily the healthcare workers. So that was a challenge, but in the end, we got what we needed. And it was very easy to get distracted during focus groups, because people then start talking about something else. Because one person I remember him talking about the contamination that happened with melamine in infant formula. At that time, it happened in China, and people were talking about that, and he was saying that, oh yeah, that melamine is going to be contaminated, and we were just thinking like, well, that's not what we are talking about, right? Because that happened in China. So anyways, so it was kind of like, but at the same time, we couldn't be rude and say, okay, let's not talk about that. We had to kind of like make the person go back to the question that we are asking. And then data analysis and interpretation was time consuming. So that is the end of my presentation. Let me first get out of, let's see, how do I, okay, I need to stop my share, sorry. Okay, okay, I stopped my share, right? Yes, okay, yes. So, I mean, we can have Dr. Reynolds go, or, however your time works. So, or I can answer questions, and I can also answer questions by email if that works easy, just in the interest of time.
Just continue with
Okay.
Dr.
So
Thank
yeah,
you.
so if anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free to also email. That's fine. Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Naig. Let's try this again. I am going to be hopeful. If the camera does not work, I apologize, but we'll just kind of keep rolling with the actual presentation. So let me see here. How is this?
Yes, good. Perfect.
It's good? You can
Yeah.
see me? Perfect. Okay, well, let's do this. So, actually, I think it's probably better that I went third, because following Dr. Naig's presentation, this ties in perfectly. So once again, I'm going to briefly talk about the actual topic of the research, but really predominantly around the data collection, data analysis, and identified best practices. So once again, kind of the idea behind this was to identify what are some important leadership competencies for hotel organizations, and specifically their leadership. Previous literature around this has been identified to develop some type of competency model to really identify what is the skill set that a hotel leader needs. Competency models have been utilized in many different industries and types of organizations, but very little has occurred in the hotel industry, specifically around qualitative research. As the first speaker noted, quantitative research is important, but again, there are some shortfalls for quantitative research. Predominantly, it doesn't give that rich, in-depth, explanation as to what is the so what is that why or that how that was previously mentioned. It might talk about, these are the list of predominantly skills or competencies needed, but we don't really get the behind the scenes, the so what, the why. So again, little research had been conducted using a qualitative approach, hence kind of the impetus for this particular study. So the proposed study was to develop a new conceptual framework using a qualitative approach, specifically focus groups, to provide that framework determining leadership competencies for
hotel leaders. So what was the research design? Again, we wanted to utilize semi-structured inquiry, and I think this is important to note, as both speakers previously noted, that utilizing focus groups, you need to have some structure, right? The key to a focus group, well, there's several probably, but one is to have a trained moderator to be able to keep the attention, but also the focus on the topic at hand. But again, not to stifle or make participants uneasy or not wanting to participate. But again, as the first speaker noted, staying neutral, right? We don't want to lead the conversation one direction or the other, but we want to have some type of structure to it. So having semi-structured inquiry, and really what that means is I'm going to come in with a protocol, with a list of questions or topics that we want to cover, but as that conversation, as that focus group starts to unfold, it might lead to other areas of inquiry that maybe we didn't think about initially, or maybe we wanted to dive into a little deeper. So not having something very rigid where I'm going to ask, question 1, then lead into question 2, then question 3, but some leeway. So it's only semi-structured. And again, we were looking at senior executive level folks in the hotel industry, so we wanted to have specific criteria for the participants that we included. So they were all C-suite or basically chief executive operators, chief financial operators, so that's C-suite level. Most focus groups lasted between 45 minutes and an hour. And again, I think this is important as well, because research has shown that if you go past about an hour, especially in a focus group, it really starts to kind of diminish in the content being collected. And as previously mentioned, again, we want to make sure that they're recorded, whether it be video, which obviously we would need to get consent to have video and pictures of faces, but certainly recorded audio. And then important again to note is that it's transcribed verbatim, as previously mentioned, and that's to note all the slang or idiosyncrasies such as those hmms or the ums, and kind of the way that that's discussed. So really what I wanted to focus on was the data analysis side of things. Really, we want to ensure that we have a set protocol. That's probably one of the most important things, is that we have some sort of structure when we're analyzing the data. As previously mentioned, this could be through the use of triangulation, which could be, utilizing multiple perspectives or multiple types of data, whether it be the focus group as well as observations, as well as, historical data, and then pull that all together. But first and foremost, we utilized a focus group. So we wanted to explore the data. And what that really means is read through those transcripts several times just to get a holistic understanding of what was discussed. So we had 3 sets of focus groups with anywhere from 5 to 8 executives in each of the focus groups. So that was quite a bit of data to really mine and review and read and wrap our heads around. So there was 3 researchers who separately, independently read through all of the transcripts. And the next step was then to kind of develop this independent coding. And I'll explain further on the next slide what that really means. But we wanted to essentially read through that data and then segment and label kind of chunks of the text. Okay, so this person said this, what does that mean? Right? We wanted to give some clarification, some meaning to it. Then, again, since that was independent, then we came back together, the 3 researchers, and verified those codes. Again, since there is no statistical analysis in qualitative research, we wanted to ensure that there was some reliability to the data. So we wanted to create that inter-rater reliability. And I'll speak to that here momentarily. Again, using codes then to develop categories. And after that, we wanted to then develop definitions for those categories, and then finally develop some overarching themes. And once those themes were developed, then we would develop definitions for the themes, and then create our holistic case study narrative. So what does that mean really visually? So again, first and foremost, we read through the data. Quite a bit of content, and that's probably one of the things that I learned very quickly in qualitative research is it's very time consuming, and especially on the researcher end after that data has been collected, right? We need to read through all that data, all those focus groups, and not just once, but several times to really get an understanding of what that looks like. So we read through that data, and then the next part was to create some codes, right? We're taking little chunks of that data and, you know, filtering it down into something a little bit more comprehensive, right? So once we have those codes, again, those were independently identified, the research team comes back together and we agree or disagree. We, you know, have these conversations about what that might have meant, and we create that inner rate of reliability. Once the codes are developed, then we want to filter that down even more, because there might be, you know, hundreds of potential codes, but we want to filter that down and distill it even better into categories. These categories then were filtered into several overarching themes, and then we can make those assertions that we were asking about before, or maybe this is a long-term qualitative study, and we can start to develop an actual theory around some of our findings. So you can see at the bottom there, it goes from that very general, you know, large transcripts to something very general in themes and the potential theory. So here's an example of that process very specifically. So one of the, you know, segments of the data that we looked at, one of our respondents said, how do you make your experience so flexible that truly caters to every customer? And so again, independently, our research team, it's just two examples of two researchers, we then coded this segment here was then coded, and researcher one said, this code expresses intuitive service and guests' needs, while researcher two said, this talks about hospitality, service, and experiential. Well, obviously those are not exactly the same, so then we came back and had that inner rate of reliability to speak of, okay, what does this mean to the research team, and what are they really trying to say in this? And therefore that category was then identified, okay, this is talking about customer service, right? How do we make your experience so flexible that truly caters to every customer? So this is talking customer service. And then once all of these categories were identified, then we developed these more overarching themes. So this would have fallen into the theme of customer expectations. So here's a kind of bigger, you know, understanding of, again, we've got the categories now, which is all of these here at the bottom that we can see here. And there's actually in this particular study, there were 20 categories that were finally identified from all the data, from all the codes to now categories, 20 categories. And within these categories here, you can see that these were then filtered into three overarching themes. And so one of the themes was around innovation, one was around employee engagement, and then that one that I just shared the example was around customer expectation. So again, innovation, technology, and change, those are three different categories under the innovation theme. So this looks great so far, but it's not really telling me the whole story. So the final thing that's needed, and I apologize that it's probably maybe too small to read specifically, but the final step is really, okay, what does this all mean to us? It's great that we've got these categories, we've got these codes, we've got these overarching themes, but what does it all mean? So then you need to create a narrative, create definitions, create explanations to what all of this actually means. So then 20 different definitions or descriptions were given to each of those overarching codes, which filtered into the categories, which filtered into the themes. So you can see this whole process is almost like a funnel where we take all of that large data and then we filter it down into what's the end result. So really quickly, last two slides here, the data collection best practices. First and foremost, we want to make sure that we have multiple contacts with our participants. We want to make sure that they're comfortable with the process. They want to be able to feel open and honest and engaging when it comes time to the actual focus group. We as the research team, you need to be flexible, right? Maybe one of the focus groups needs to be held online because something came up. So flexibility is very important. Finding a good gatekeeper, and what that really means is, again, as Dr. Naig previously talked about, maybe healthcare providers aren't as inclined or comfortable to share their experience, or just they don't have enough time to be able to actually share this. So we want to find a good gatekeeper. Maybe it's the director of a particular hospital that we can communicate with, that will then talk to their healthcare providers on our behalf to explain the importance of this research. Always develop some type of collection protocol. Again, that example of that semi-structured interview protocol. Always record for later analysis, and if possible, have at least 2 researchers present, as Dr. Naig just pointed out, a lead moderator and then an assistant, and if possible, even better would be multiple researchers just taking notes. Final thoughts: data analysis, independent at first, right? And then have that inter-rater reliability. Develop a standard protocol, and most important, we want to develop that final narrative, because again, just having themes and codes and data is certainly great, but it needs to be meaningful. What is the story behind it? So developing that final narrative is crucial to get your message out there. All right, well, thank you so much, and I am all set and done, and I would love to open it back up for questions.
Thank you, Assistant Professor Dr. Joe Reynolds, and just now, thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Anirudh, for very insightful information on the qualitative research. Okay, a lot of interesting findings shared by Dr. Naig on the food safety, and then the very clear and thorough explanation on the data analysis, right? Thank you so much for both. I have a few questions actually. Okay, the first question go to Dr. Naig. Okay, what are the criteria for journal reviewers, editor, when it comes to evaluating qualitative empirical study? We are talking about the publication. What are the criteria looking by the editor?
So I mean, I'm not an editor for a journal, but I think that there are just very few journals, especially in hospitality, which actually kind of are familiar with qualitative research. So I think that and I think if you talk to Dr. Arndt, I think she'll also tell you that it's just people probably they themselves don't understand. So when you submit something, they are even more confused because they don't know how to react to it. So then I think like if you read the article that that I was talking about, you will see that it's really very simple, and it's not because I was involved with it. I think it's simple. I think it's just the way of writing was simple and not too complicated, because I think then that kind of helped in getting it also published, and also the journal in which we published would also a journal that we that accepted like a publication fee, and I think that was done because we just wanted to make this process go faster because DI also wanted us to finish the funds by a certain time. So so in a way, so I don't know if the publication fee played a role, but I would say that clarity in writing. So clarity and keeping it simple, because those who are looking at it may themselves not know, and I don't want to say that they are not good at it. It's just not usually done with hospitality. It's just so common to be in the safety net of surveys that anything else is like confusing for them. But contemporary hospitality international journal, they have quite a bit. There may be some in hospitality and tourism research. I have not seen much of that, but I've seen mostly in that. I mean, with food safety, we've had in like maybe in food protection and also food protection trends, they may have that. But again, with food safety specific journals, the thing is like they are kind of also used to quantitative kind of like microbial data and things like that. So it's kind of difficult for them. So I guess my criteria would be just to be clear, no matter quantitative or qualitative, just be clear in writing, which is hard to do.
Okay, I have another question for Dr. Joe Reynolds. The question from Nadia is inter-rater reliability necessary for qualitative research? What if you were conducting the research alone for your thesis, for example? That is actually the actual question.
That's a great question. So hopefully, if you are conducting research, especially for maybe a graduate thesis or a postdoctoral dissertation, hopefully you don't feel like you're alone, because hopefully you have a major professor or someone kind of advising you. And my suggestion or advice would be to have them also reviewing that data and doing their own kind of separate analysis. So then you have somebody else to provide that in a rate of reliability. I think it's very important that at least two sets of eyes, if you will, have analyzed and come up with these analysis.
Okay, another question. How to combine qualitative and quantitative research, because we are dealing with two different kind of data. So what are the best advice you can give? Dr. Joe Reynolds.
Sure, I can take the first stab, and I'll certainly open it up to the other speakers. This is a great question, and actually I was hoping that something like this would come up. Oftentimes I will now utilize, to Dr. Naig's point, that a lot of journals are not familiar specifically with qualitative exclusively research. So I do a lot of mixed methods is what we would call that. And it's incorporating qualitative as well as quantitative. And I think this is really important because it kind of helps maybe journals that aren't as familiar with qualitative kind of dip their toe into it, if you will, and become a little more comfortable with it. And how I do that is I'll start with a quantitative approach. Maybe it's a survey looking at a specific topic, and then come back with the qualitative. Depending on the findings of that quantitative survey, then we can get that more rich kind of in-depth data from the qualitative, again, developed from the results of that quantitative.
I have one last question for Dr. Anirudh Naig. What is actually the main problem? The main problem when it comes to the focus group interview? What are the main challenge?
Well, I think as a researcher, it's going to be your main challenge is going to be to determine is that the right method to use, and then also like I mentioned earlier, just the idea of getting all this information and then you don't know what to do with it, and especially when you don't have, we're not very familiar, and that's why, like Dr. Reynolds said, if you're going to do that work as a student, hopefully you're not alone, and your major professor will work with you on that, or somebody who knows what they're doing, because if you do it by, I don't think that will also fly with the journals. They will not be okay with it, that knowing that you did it just by yourself and nobody did any, because that's why there's reliability and all those things, right? So as kind of like checks. So I think in terms of difficulties is just knowing that, yes, this is what I should do. And then also kind of going, once you get the information, it's like, okay, it's all this stuff, and what do I do now? So kind of taking a step back and not getting. I mean, I'm kind of giving advice which I don't follow because I feel like I get panic so easily. So, but just knowing that, okay, let's just step back and just be okay. Let's take it one step at a time, and it's not impossible, but it's definitely something which does need attention to detail. So I would say that. Oh, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry. I have one last question, because there are a lot of questions coming in. This question asks, how many rater will be suitable for the process of inter-raterability?
Is Dr. Muhammad going to answer that, or?
Anyone?
Yeah. Okay. It's Dr. Muhammad, because his was like an overview. So.
What
Dr.
was the
Hairi?
question? Sorry.
Okay, the question is, how many rater will be suitable for the process of inter-raterability?
I'm not very familiar with that. Maybe you can rephrase the question for me so I can understand better the question.
And I can actually step in here. I think at least 2 researchers at a minimum. Certainly the more the better. I don't know that there's kind of a gold standard, but it has to be at least 2. Again, to have those independent and then come together to develop that inter-rater. And I think also to note is the threshold of inter-rater reliability. We want to have at least a 95% agreement between these 2 separately to kind of move forward. Because, for example, if as I read something through the data and I'm thinking this, but Dr. Naig is over here thinking this, and we're very separate, I think that's probably very problematic, and we can't move forward developing results if we're very separate and very distant on what we're coming together with. So at least 2 researchers, certainly, obviously the more the better, because we can get varying perspectives, but we want to ensure that before we move forward, we have to have at least 95% inter-rater reliability.
So the 95% is the rule of thumb, is it? Because I'm wondering also.
And yeah, I think that's a great question. I don't know that that's necessarily a rule of thumb per se. I think that that's pretty hard set in previous research, findings and publications.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for the explanation just now. Okay. Okay, thank you to you all speaker, Dr. Hairi Jalis, Assistant Professor Dr. Joe Reynolds, and Associate Professor Dr. Anirudh Naig for the great session. To all audiences from Universiti Teknologi Mara, please don't forget to scan QR code show on the screen and fill up the attendance and feedback form. We register as training hours for UITM staff. Okay. All speakers, please wait for a while because we are going to have a photo session.